of Power, live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons.
Tonight, the standoff in Los Angeles. The state of upheaval in L.A. after weekend demonstrations.
It was very clear that if raids happened here, that the community was going to respond in a very negative way.
The state of upheaval in L.A. after weekend demonstrations over a series of federal immigration raids deteriorated into street clashes with ICE officers and local police. The president overriding California's governor and local officials by sending in 2,000 National Guard troops. And now the Pentagon this evening mobilizing about 700 active duty Marines to provide reinforcements to those troops. We'll have a report from the ground.
Plus, in London, and hoping to make a deal. U.S. and Chinese negotiators spent hours in trade talks today as the U.S. signals a willingness to move on some key issues. We'll have details of the progress made on day one with another round of talks set for tomorrow.
And Republicans wave goodbye to Elon Musk. Musk's strong and vocal opposition to the Trump tax package does not appear to be threatening the bill as Republican lawmakers race to get it done by their July 4th deadline. Republican Congressman Darrell Issa of California will join us with more. We begin, though, with the escalating clashes in Los Angeles, a fourth day of protests against the administration's immigration crackdown as demonstrators face off with law enforcement, including more than 2,000 National Guard troops. President Trump deployed them over opposition from the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, who is demanding their removal, calling it a, quote, serious breach of state sovereignty. President Trump responding this afternoon.
It's lucky for the people in Los Angeles and in California that we did what we did. We got it just in time. It's still simmering a little bit, but not very much.
The president's words there running counter to the action the administration is now taking, sending about 700 active duty U.S. Marines to help quell the protests. It's an explosive moment that seemingly erupted overnight, but was months in the making after community leaders railed against ICE raids and deportations, with more than 87,000 arrests made by ICE since Inauguration Day, and the agency deporting roughly 77,500 people, leading to scenes like the one you're seeing if you're with us on Bloomberg TV, Democratic lawmakers getting arrested themselves in some instances as they demonstrated against the moves, with the administration, of course, looking to make good on its promise to carry out mass deportations. But let's go now on the ground to Los Angeles, where we find Bloomberg's Alicia Caldwell for the latest developments. So, Alicia, obviously the addition of Marines now being sent to Los Angeles, a major escalation. What's likely to happen from here?
It's unclear what's next. There's, a few hundred National Guardsmen who are on the ground in Los Angeles. They've been primarily focused around, or singularly focused rather, around federal buildings in the downtown area. Where those 700 Marines are headed is unclear. It appears they will back up the National Guard and bolster those National Guardsmen, but it's highly unusual for active duty troops. I'm not sure this has much precedence. We've seen, of course, in the past of U.S. history, federalized National Guard troops. And of course, National Guard troops are activated not routinely, but when needed by state governors. We saw it here in Los Angeles after the wildfires in January. That part's not unusual. The unusual part is the federalized nature of this and the active duty Marines.
The active duty Marines, the most recent development here following news that the governor is in fact filing suit over this, suing the administration over the initial deployment of National Guard troops. Alicia, I presume that covers any military that's going to be on the streets of Los Angeles. What do we know about this legal action?
That's my understanding as well, that basically the governor has said, this is in violation of state rights, if you will, and is challenging this deployment altogether. Now, military, as a rule, active duty military is prohibited from participating in civil law enforcement. We'll see what their exact role is, but what we're seeing across LA right now are reports of continued arrests by Border Patrol and ICE and others who are working with those two agencies. We have contractors who are driving vehicles loaded with folks who had been arrested in Home Depot parking lots and other incidents or other locations. So we're seeing the ICE activity continue, which the agency promised over the weekend that people in the city would see that activity continue. Protests have continued as well. There's a gathering in downtown Los Angeles right now that, for the moment, appears largely peaceful. We'll see how the day progresses. Historically, what we've seen in the last several days is things start small, things start rather peaceful, occasional skirmishes. But now, as the day progresses, we see more and more violence, as we did over the weekend, particularly last night, as things escalated with confrontations between demonstrators and the Los Angeles Police Department.
Alicia, it's great to have you with us here. Bloomberg's Alicia Caldwell from our Los Angeles bureau. We thank you. And for more on the legal implications of this escalation in L.A., we turn to David Leopold, former president of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, partner and group leader now in immigration at UB Greensfelder. It's great to have you back with us. And I'm wondering your thoughts on the grounds, the legal grounds that this White House is hinging all of this on, with the idea of squelching a rebellion in the streets of L.A. That was the justification for sending in the National Guard. Did you see a rebellion on the streets of L.A. last night?
No, I haven't seen a rebellion, nor has anybody else. What you've seen is people exercising their First Amendment rights, the right to redress the government. That's called protest. That is in the Constitution. And that is what these troops are being sent out to suppress. That is not American. That is not part of our core values. And when you think about it, who are they targeting? These ICE personnel in full military garb. They're targeting essential workers, the people who put food on the table, the people who work hard. I think Governor Gavin Newsom put it very succinctly the other day when he was interviewed. These are people who are hardworking folks. And to send full military garb dressed National Guard, and now to call in the Marines, this is shocking.
Well, David, to that point, how much of an escalation is the deployment of active duty members of the United States military? What is the legal justification for such a move? How does it contrast with the one to deploy the National Guard?
I suspect that what they're going to say is they're not there to enforce civil law, but I think it doesn't fly. That's exactly what they're there for, the Marines. And I think we're going to see Governor Gavin Newsom and others go right into federal court to stop this. Look, this is a deliberate spreading of chaos, confusion, and fear by the administration. To what end? I mean, there's a number of different motivations. They want to get this bill through Congress with $151 billion plus for immigration enforcement. They've got a problem with former friend Elon Musk trashing that bill. Don't take my word for it. That's what the president's deputy chief of staff, Stephen Miller, tweeted the other day or earlier today. I don't know. But there's other motivations here. But look, this is really dangerous stuff. Immigration is the tip of the spear aimed at the heart of due process, aimed at civil liberties in this country, and we are sadly seeing it come to fruition.
Well, you wonder if it lands in Gavin Newsom's lap in a very real way. You've heard the threats from the border czar, Tom Homan, to arrest the governor of California, and he actually did talk about this last evening on cable news, addressing that threat on MSNBC. David, let's listen together.
He's a tough guy. Why doesn't he do that? He knows where to find me. But you know what? Let your hands off 4-year-old girls that are trying to get educated. Let your hands off these poor people who are just trying to live their lives, man. Trying to live their lives, paying their taxes, been here 10 years. The fear, the horror. The hell is this guy? Come after me, arrest me. Let's just get it over with.
Well, he hasn't been arrested yet, David, but even Donald Trump said today if he were Tom Homan, he would arrest Gavin Newsom, and he suggested that Gavin Newsom might enjoy it for the publicity. Does the White House have the legal standing to arrest the sitting governor of California?
It's not even a question. Absolutely not. I mean, it is. Look, if this wasn't so terrifying a moment where the president of the United States and his chief immigration czar are threatening the sitting governor of the largest state in the union, or any state in the union, with arrest because he is doing his job, he is protecting the people of California, and he's right. If they're so tough, stop arresting 4-year-old girls, stop arresting dishwashers, stop arresting people who are putting food on our table, people who are taxpayers. This is really appalling. And I commend Governor Newsom for standing up for what's right and for doing his job. They're not going to arrest Newsom. They have no grounds. The President of the United States or Tom Homan, they have no grounds. And this thuggish talk has no place in American politics and in American discourse, let alone coming from the mouth of the President of the United States and his top aides. Appalling.
Well, David, when we consider what started all of this, the idea that there is great upset about the action of ICE and immigration authorities and raids that they were conducting in Los Angeles, that is why we are seeing protests continue for a fourth day, which I believe we can show you if you're with us on Bloomberg TV or on YouTube. When we consider the actual action immigration authorities are taking, do we have any evidence of them operating outside legal bounds? Do we know for certain that all of these people they're looking to arrest are being given adequate due process?
Well, that's the whole point. They've stopped trying to give. They've attempted to knock down due process from the day that the president was sworn into office. We saw what happened to those who were, sent off without trial, without hearing to El Salvador under the Alien Enemies Act. You talk about rebellion now going on in California, which is not happening. There was no rebellion by any Venezuelans. No invasion by Venezuela to justify the Alien Enemies Act. There's no justification for the attempt to stop birthright citizenship. Most of the things, or all of the things that they've gone after, have no justification. And here's the thing. The President of the United States ran on a platform of securing the border, right? That's what he ran on. That's what he won on, at least in part. That's been done. The border's quiet. And I think most of the Americans who voted for him are going to be absolutely stunned and surprised that what they voted for, or what they're seeing now, is a president and a group of, enablers who are trying to shut down due process and throw out and shred the Constitution of the United States.
All right, David Leopold, we appreciate your time. Former president of the American Immigration Lawyers Association and partner and group leader in immigration at UB Greensfelder. Thank you so much. Coming up, we'll have a status update on today's trade talks in London between the U.S. and China. We'll dive into what's next for these negotiations with Melanie Hart, senior director at the Atlantic Council's Global China Hub, and speak with Republican Congressman Darrell Issa of California. Coming up on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio.
Causing the problem are professional agitators, they're insurrectionists, they're bad people, they should be in jail.
President Trump earlier today reacting to protests in Los Angeles, where the National Guard and now active duty U.S. Marines have been deployed. For more here on Bloomberg TV and radio, we turn now to Capitol Hill, where Republican Congressman Darrell Issa of California is joining us live. Congressman, welcome to Balance of Power. We appreciate your time, sir. When we consider the actions of the administration here, why should this not be seen as an encroachment on state sovereignty, on states' rights?
Well, because it's not about states' rights, it's about supremacy. It was about supremacy when Eisenhower sent troops in to Alabama. It was about supremacy when Lyndon Johnson did it. When the Constitution, when citizens are not being protected by their state, they have every right to be protected. In this case, law enforcement was overwhelmed by insurrectionists. The president saw that. As a matter of fact, our ICE agents called for support and waited 2 hours before they got any relief. So no question at all. There was a valid reason the president did it, and he did it for the same reason the presidents have done it in the past.
Is there a difference in your mind between deploying National Guardsmen and active duty United States Marines, active duty U.S. military members on U.S. soil?
Oh, absolutely. There's a difference. And here's the difference. Those National Guardsmen are regularly deployed as an extension of law enforcement, which they have been. The Marines have been deployed specifically to protect federal property, which they have every right to do, and they will do that. The president is appropriately using each of them in a way that complies with federal law passed by Congress.
I want to ask you about Congress and the Posse Comitatus Act. If we're going to put military troops on the ground here in this country, Congressman, shouldn't you and your colleagues have a say?
Well, actually, we did have a say, and we passed that law, and it very much, in addition to the Insurrection Act, each of them defines when and how you can use those forces. But understand, the National Guard, activated by the federal government, does in fact have the right to do exactly what they're doing. And let's understand, you can see those forces. Are they making arrests? For the most part, they're not. What they're actually doing is they're giving the police the ability to make those arrests. Out of 100 arrests, 47 of them were done by California badged law enforcement. The rest were mostly done by ICE, taking into custody people they had warrants for. So they're doing exactly what they're supposed to do. When you hear differently, you're not hearing from the police differently. You're hearing from the very people who are supporting this lawlessness, the burning of vehicles, the bricking and cinder blocking of law enforcement trying to do their job.
Well, when we consider ICE, Congressman, administration officials, including the White House press secretary Caroline Leavitt, are pointing to the one big, beautiful bill that just passed your chamber, that it would hire 10,000 new ICE personnel, 5,000 new customs officers, 3,000 new Border Patrol agents. Do the scenes we're seeing out of Los Angeles make it harder for any of your Republican colleagues in the House to vote no if this package is to return to the House changed in some way by your colleagues in the U.S. Senate?
Well, look, I voted yes. Almost every Republican voted yes. I expect it to come back from the Senate with some changes. But one of the important things is that we do need to back not just the men and women in blue locally, but those who bear that same responsibility federally, and we intend to do so. Understand, the last administration let over 10 million people into the country, many of whom are already due to leave and haven't left. So there's going to be a huge job, and we're going to need the resources to do it. And President Trump ran on making this change. He's making this change, and he's doing it pursuant to the Constitution. And yes, there have been court challenges, and he's respected the outcome in the court. But he was elected to do this. I was re-elected to do this. And I expect that we are going to bring safety. You know, and the midterm elections are coming up in just a matter of months again. And we're going to be asked a question, are Americans safer now than they were 2 years ago? And we have to be able to answer, yes, they are, because Donald Trump did and because Congress backed him.
All right, Congressman, great to have you with us. Republican Congressman Darrell Issa of California, we thank you. Another day of trade talks in London are on the schedule between the U.S. and China. Here's the president earlier today on where negotiations stand. Leading the talks for the U.S., Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, along with Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer, all in the same room and at the table. And Bloomberg's Annmarie Hordern has more from London.
After more than 6 hours of talks in London, the U.S. and Chinese delegations have left without an agreement, but they did agree to meet again tomorrow. So positive signals that potentially they can come to an understanding. What we are hearing is potentially the United States is willing to ease some export controls. That was really underscored here by the fact that Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick joined the delegation. He was not present for the Geneva talks just about 4 weeks ago. In exchange, what Washington wants to see out of Beijing is an advanced pace of those rare earth licenses and magnets. This is critical to the U.S. defense and tech industry, especially in things like mobile phones. Leaving the meetings in London in this 19th century mansion, Secretary Bessent said it was a good meeting with a thumbs up. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said they were fruitful. Joe, Kaylee, we'll see if they bear results tomorrow.
Bloomberg's Annmarie Hordern reporting from the ground in London. And for more on these trade talks, we turn now to Melanie Hart, Senior Director at the Atlantic Council's Global China Hub, who is here with us in our Washington, D.C. studio. So, Melanie, where should we be setting the bar of the outcome of a second day of talks tomorrow? Is it enough if they just walk away with a handshake and we agree not to escalate, at least for now?
The bar should be pretty low. You know, the goal for these talks is just to get back to where we were a couple of weeks ago in May, when the U.S. and China negotiated a tariff ceasefire to create a 90-day process to have deeper discussions.
You made a great point there. This isn't exactly progress if we're just trying to get back to a point that followed so-called Liberation Day. There's been this idea of relief, though, that if the rare earths and batteries come through on the China side, if export controls are loosened on the U.S. side, maybe we have a deal. But is that a fair deal? And why is the U.S. giving up more now?
So I wouldn't call it a deal necessarily. It's an agreement to get back to deal making. Really, we have a misalignment between the U.S. and China in understanding coming out of the Switzerland meetings a couple weeks ago on what the 90 days was supposed to look like. The U.S. expected that China would be exporting and granting licenses for rare earth magnets at a pretty quick clip, but the licenses were pretty slow, and that resulted in Ford having to shut down production, which is a big deal. China was expecting the United States to withhold any new measures on chip controls, but the U.S. put out new export control measures on May 15th. So this is really an aim to unravel some of the things that agitated the two sides over the past couple of weeks.
Well, when we consider those export controls, this administration is frankly just continuing policy that we saw in the last administration as well. There's a concerted effort to restrain China's technological capability. If we're to unwind some of these export controls, what position does that put U.S. national security in?
This is really problematic because when I'm sitting across the table from my Chinese counterparts, the argument I always make is when we put export controls in place, it's for solid national security purposes, and that's why we don't use them as leverage. When you do it in rare earths, it's very clearly just a move to exert leverage over other countries because you turn them off and on at will. This is really a bit unprecedented. It's moving the U.S. into the position where we turn our chip export controls off and on at will, if that is indeed on the negotiation table. Which that's a concern.
Isn't how you treat a national security crisis, obviously. What kind of chips are we talking about? These aren't H20 chips coming out from NVIDIA, right? These are lower level semiconductors that we decided to pull back on?
The particular measure that Beijing is really focused on is a May 15th announcement from the United States that is a warning to other nations that if they are purchasing Huawei AI chips, the U.S. considers those chips to likely contain export-controlled material that wasn't licensed, and thus the third country chips could face U.S. enforcement measures. So it's really a warning to other countries around the world not to buy Huawei AI chips.
When we consider that these meetings are happening after an hour-and-a-half-long phone conversation between President Trump and Xi Jinping last week, are the incentives there for Xi specifically right now to agree to meet with President Trump in person to show any kind of faltering in China's stance on this, or is it actually Trump that has the weaker hand?
China has more leverage than we do at this point. Beijing has been working for at least a decade to build up that leverage. It's no accident that they control around 99% of these rare earths magnets. They built up that control on purpose for this moment, and now they're using it. We don't have the same leverage. That's why it's really important that whenever we apply trade policy or export control measures on China, that they be policies we're interested to live with and that are in our own national interests.
Yeah, we're almost out of time. I want to get back to the original premise here because it sounds like we're nibbling around the edges. We have an August deadline for something bigger. Should we be talking about a comprehensive trade deal, or is that truly years away?
I don't see a comprehensive trade deal that would be in U.S. national interest. There are other things we can do. China has just demonstrated that they're very good at export control regimes for rare earths. They could do the exact same thing for fentanyl. There are things like that that should absolutely be on the table and that we could definitely agree to.
I guess we'll check back in a couple of weeks and see where we are. Stay close to us. Great conversation with Melanie Hart, Senior Director of the Atlantic Council's Global China Hub. We thank you, as always, for the insights. Coming up, we'll turn back to the latest coming from the protests in L.A. when we assemble our political panel. Much more to follow following a weekend of clashes. And if you're with us live on Bloomberg TV or on YouTube, we bring you a live view of downtown L.A. on this day 4, where we are watching continued protesters with National Guard and now Marine Corps troops being mobilized by the White House. Much more ahead on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I had a little problem with Tim Cook yesterday. I said to him, Tim, you're my friend. I treated you very good. You're coming in with $500 billion, but now I hear you're building all over India. I don't want you building in India.
President Trump last month on Apple's plan to move more of its iPhone production to India in an effort to diversify its production outside of China. The president, of course, later threatened a 25% tariff on all smartphones unless they're made in the U.S., a demand that would be nearly impossible for both logistic and economic reasons. As Apple navigates that global trade uncertainty, the company is also holding its annual developers conference this week, unveiling the most sweeping software redesign in its history. And for the details, we turn now on Bloomberg TV and radio to Ed Ludlow, host of Bloomberg Tech, who is live on Apple's campus in Cupertino, California. So, Ed, talk to us about this redesign. Just how dramatic is it?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, Apple would position this as the sort of most dramatic redesign in its history. But at the end of the day, it's just a new interface for its operating systems across the full suite of hardware products that it offers: iPhone, Mac, iPad, and watchOS. You know, it's so interesting to rehear that clip, because that's been the story so far in 2025. Apple is down, 19% so far in the year, and trailing some of its peers in the mega cap tech context. But all of that trading was basically focused around trade risk, the tariff risk and the supply chain risk that the president has been alluding to. But something very shortly after 1 p.m. Eastern happened that reframed this about AI. Apple executives in the keynote said, we have nothing to say about Siri right now. And then the stock started trading more about the lack of an AI story. So it's just a very interesting how the focus momentum shifts. We got a lot on the software side, not on the AI side. And that was kind of in line with what we were expecting.
Well, you just answered my question, I think, Ed, which was who's asking for the refresh? Everyone's asking about AI. And with regard to what we just heard from President Trump, do we have any indication that Apple plans to move any supply chains, or will the company eat the tariff?
Yeah, it's near impossible to answer. To get a real sense of the supply chain for any of Apple's hardware, not just the iPhone, you have to put yourself into mainland China and stand outside of a Foxconn facility. Foxconn assembles the final iPhone product. But you have the Foxconn assembly plant, and next to it, adjacent to it, literally in walking distance, you have all of the critical component suppliers. And Tim Cook said in 2017, did he not? In China, you could fill a sports stadium with all of the specialist tooling engineers that are part of that process. In America, here in Cupertino, you couldn't even fill a meeting room with the number of tooling specialists we have in this country. So it seems distant, and even the cost impact is incalculable at this stage, which is why they're focused on making their software more competitive, I would say, to keep their place in this market.
Interesting.
Well, when we're considering their place in the market, what kind of demand environment is Apple contending with right now, Ed? For all of the conversation we've had about tariffs raising costs potentially or slowing down consumption, is Apple really starting to feel that yet in terms of what's coming in top line?
Well, the third-party data would suggest no. You know, smartphone shipments, at least in the first calendar quarter of the year, but some evidence into the second quarter as well, were strong. The counter-argument to that would be that consumers, and indeed the companies that are moving handsets across borders, did so in anticipation of tariffs. They knew they were coming because prior to November's election, President Trump told us they would come. And so if you know those are coming, why not buy a handset before they take effect? That is a part of it. But bring it back to WWDC. At the end of the day, Apple has gone through periods of uncertainty, both political and economic, before. It has an entrenched market position. It serves a particular demographic of economies in this country, Western Europe, China, etc., where software competence, the quality of the product matters. You know, particularly when you are selling a handset for $1,000, you know, that more premium segment. And so they will hope that today resonated with that buyer, irrespective of the macro environment that we face.
Yeah. With us from Cupertino, Ed Ludlow, the host of Bloomberg Tech. Ed, great to have you back on Balance of Power. Some of the other stories we're following tonight: the Department of Health and Human Services is retiring the 17 members of a committee of government vaccine advisors. Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. saying today in a Wall Street Journal editorial, quote, "A clean sweep is needed to reestablish public confidence in vaccine science," unquote. The group, known as the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, has been reviewing data and making recommendations centering on immunizations for over 61 years. To the Middle East now, after Israel intercepted a humanitarian aid ship carrying activists, including Greta Thunberg. Will send those on board back to their home nations.
The ship was carrying food, baby formula, and medical supplies, which were confiscated by Israel. and were intercepted 200 kilometers from Gaza.
Israel has been at war with Hamas since October 7, 2023, and has been controlling the delivery of humanitarian assistance to Gaza's population of about 2 million.
And in South America, where Colombian presidential candidate Miguel Uribe Turbay is in critical condition after an assassination attempt on Saturday, in which he was shot twice in the head and once in the leg.
A 15-year-old youth arrested in relation to that shooting, and authorities are trying now to establish who ordered the attack and what the motive was.
The attack has sparked widespread concern and protests, with hundreds of people marching past the hospital where Uribe is being treated to show their support for the presidential hopeful. And as we consider protests in Colombia, we're also watching, of course, protests in Los Angeles, something that was discussed this morning on Bloomberg Radio with Andrew Cuomo, the frontrunner in New York City's Democratic mayoral primary and former governor for the state of New York, who discussed those protests in Los Angeles and specifically as well the Trump administration's response. Here's a piece of that conversation.
Let's remember how extraordinary these issues, what's happening in L.A. This is the exact reverse of what normally happens. Normally, it's the local government that makes the decision on how to handle an emergency and calls on the federal government. So a mayor or a governor would call on the federal government and say, I need help, please send the National Guard, or please send in additional federal help. I don't believe there's been a time where the president has sent in federal troops. You'd have to go back to like the 60s, and President Johnson and Wallace, right? That's how far you have to go back. So this is Trump being Trump. This is Trump on this issue of immigration. I'm muscled. It's law and order. These cities, these Democrats, they're filled with illegals, and I'm going to come in, and I'm going to come in hot and heavy. He started in L.A. It will happen in New York. It will happen. He knows the formula, right? It happened in New Jersey.
Is this formula to go after you? I mean, this is anticipated.
His formula is to create chaos in the cities, and he is the voice of law and order. And, you know, cities, all those Democrats, that's where all those illegal immigrants are. And he's going to come in and he's going to clean up. The flip side is, okay, create chaos in L.A., create chaos in New York, create chaos in Chicago. Pretty soon, you create chaos in the nation, and that's bad for the economy.
You can find Bloomberg's full conversation with Andrew Cuomo, New York City mayoral candidate, online or on the terminal. A deep dive with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney. And a great conversation. Coming up, tensions continue in Los Angeles as California sues the Trump administration over the deployment of the National Guard and now the Marine Corps. We'll continue the discussion with our political panel next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Wines. We're back with our top story tonight as we are now in the fourth day of protests against the administration's immigration crackdown. Demonstrators facing off with law enforcement.
Including more than 2,000 National Guard troops. As we've been reporting, President Trump deployed them over opposition from California Governor Gavin Newsom, who is now demanding their removal, calling it a, quote, serious breach of state sovereignty. Unquote. The state now suing for their removal. As I mentioned, the administration sending on top of it about 700 Marines to Los Angeles from Camp Pendleton. The governor just posting on X. U.S. Marines have served honorably across multiple wars in defense of democracy. They are heroes. They should not be deployed on American soil facing their own countrymen to fulfill the deranged fantasy of a dictatorial president. He writes, this is un-American. Joining us now, senior defense analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence, retired Army Colonel Wayne Sanders. Wayne, it's great to have you with us here on Balance of Power. On what grounds can the president deploy not necessarily National Guard troops, but active duty U.S. Marines?
Under Title 10, which is the ability for under U.S. Code Title 10, one of the biggest things that they can do, that's the federal force, right? That's really looking at the U.S. military. It's the Department of Defense underneath the DoD under SecDef to be able to deploy troops in that case. In this specific one, right, you really look at there's several different titles. There's Title 32, which is the National Guard piece of it, where normally, unless it is federalized, normally stays underneath the governor. But under this, it's a Title 10 authority that the president has through the Secretary of Defense to be able to deploy. Really, in this case, trying to be able to use it for protection of federal facilities and their personnel. That's really where it is. It's a support role to local law enforcement. It is to be able to provide whatever they can to be able to quell any concerns that might be out there. That's what they're going over there to do.
Well, and considering how this in some ways is a departure from the typical role these service members are used to being in, is this something they received training for, Wayne?
So in some aspects, yes. If you look at the way that that soldiers and Marines are trained for counterinsurgency operations, a lot of folks still have experience based off of that. And one of the things that no matter what member of military you are, as you look at things inside of rules of engagement, you also look at things like escalation of force. And so based off of that, I think this is one of those areas where you're going to see that training that they have is specifically, it's going to be fairly restrictive in terms of what they're doing. They're also going to be doing in that, like I said, in that support role first and foremost. So that training that they have is still going to be based off of, you don't make a move unless somebody else makes that move. You are here under specific authorities, which they will be granted. They will be gone over and trained on all of those things in terms of the separation of all the titles from Title 32 for the state sponsored for the National Guard, Title 18 for local law enforcement, Title 10 for the military. And so based off of each of those, before anybody would be out there, these are the things that they are trained to be able to do.
Well, Wayne, when you talk about Title 10, U.S. Code on Armed Services, it allows for the federal deployment of troops in this case if there is a rebellion or danger of a rebellion against the authority of the government of the United States. I'm not sure how we're qualifying rebellion here, but Stephen Miller, the Deputy Chief of Staff of the White House, called this an insurrection against the laws and sovereignty of the U.S. When President Trump was asked about it today, he said no, he didn't think that it was an insurrection. So how can any of this stand up in court?
No, I think that, so, I mean, if you're trying to use the Marines, if you're trying to use the Title 10 people to actually go out and do arrests, which they're not asking them to do at this time, that would actually have to call upon the Insurrection Act itself, which would allow for that, right? That has not happened yet. And so it's still below that level. So I think a lot of any of the types of arrests that would take place would have to be done under local law enforcement, under Title 18, or under National Guard under Title 32. Those are the pieces that are already out there. But the Insurrection Act is the one key piece that would cause it to go beyond that, and it hasn't happened yet.
Got it.
So finally, Wayne, if you were in command here and you're sending U.S. Marines into this situation, is there a real risk to the safety if the administration is saying in part this is because protesters are acting violently? To get back to rules of engagement, what happens if a U.S. Marine is confronted by someone who may not be equipped with the kind of weaponry or skills that Marine is who could respond?
No, absolutely. And I think one of the biggest thing that every U.S. military member has ever gone is you always have the right to self-defense. You're not going to sit there and allow somebody to throw something at you, a Molotov cocktail, you name it, whatever, that would put your life in danger. But one thing that everybody is trained on is whatever the lowest level of force that is capable to quell the situation is what they would be going forward to do. So as a previous commander, if I was in that situation, there are two things that I would remind everybody. One is that we're here to support local law enforcement. Our goal is to reduce those tensions if at all possible. And second is to leave your personal feelings at home. These are human beings, and we're here to protect everyone. The citizens in LA may be angry or have pushed boundaries, whatever, but never forget who you are and who you represent. You represent the United States military, and in this case, the United States Marine Corps, and how you act will echo through history if you're not careful. And so these are things that I really do believe that they would train for. This is what they would prepare for before ever being put in protection of a building or a facility. It's
good to have you with us, Wayne. He's with the great team at Bloomberg Intelligence. Wayne Sanders We thank you so much as we assemble our political panel for their reaction to all of this. Lester Munson is here, Principal Managing Director of the International Practice at BGR Group, our Republican strategist, alongside Bloomberg Politics contributor Jeannie Sheehan Zaino, Democratic analyst and political science professor at Iona University. Great to have both of you with us. Lester, you just heard the whole legal argument. We're asking questions about legal standing and what this means for the courts. How about raw politics? This is playing well for Donald Trump.
It's playing well for Donald Trump. I think it's also playing well for Governor Newsom.
Isn't that right?
I think they're both kind of rooting for something even more dramatic to happen every single day.
Does that make you worry about what they're both going to do next?
Well, I think this is the politics that we have today. It's performative. People are looking for every little thing to make the major point to their constituency. Governor Newsom, it's not implausible. He's our next president. He sees this as an opportunity to take on the current one, kind of mano a mano. They're both using kind of macho language, and so are their minions. And here we go.
Well, so, Jeannie, should we read that as neither side has the political incentive to de-escalate here?
They don't seem to at this point. There is a danger for Donald Trump. People are glad that he closed the borders. The CBS poll on Sunday shows that about 54% support his deportation agenda. They support him going after criminals and removing them from the country. But when you start removing people from Home Depot and busboys from local restaurants and going after kids in schools, that's when people in neighborhoods start to say, this is not what we signed up for. So I think Donald Trump knows that. Let's not forget, just not that much, a couple months ago, he was on Meet the Press, and he said these pictures could get very vile and very ugly, and they may not play well. So that is a political danger for Donald Trump. But I think the reality is this doesn't serve anybody from either the Democratic or Republican side. The only way to solve our immigration crisis is through congressional legislation. So in my mind, it is pox on both of their houses, because this, mano on mano, as Lester was talking about, is not going to get us a policy that we need to solve the immigration crisis.
Many of these arrests that were being protested, Lester, were being based on violent criminal history from some of these young men, realizing that this led to a cascade of events here. Getting back to the initial action, though, was that the right thing to do, to pull these people out of work and arrest them because of the criminal records? The president would say it's promises made, promises kept.
Well, I think we'll see it on a case-by-case basis. We saw with the El Salvador example, it was one man going down there who probably should not have gone down there in that group. That kind of defined the issue. Are we going to find one person who maybe they should not have gone after that can kind of recalibrate the narrative about all of this? I think Jeannie's right. Overall, President Trump on pretty good ground politically to be pursuing these issues. Remember, President Obama deported 3 million people during his 8 years in the White House. This is not unprecedented. On the other hand, the images, if we're sending federal troops near a school and suddenly there's some kid coming out who looks very sympathetic, that could change the dynamic in a heartbeat. And I think again, we're seeing both Trump, Newsom, maybe some other folks trying to position themselves to use this controversy to maximum political advantage.
Well, and doesn't that count as well, Lester, for the president's legislative agenda? Is there's administration officials across the board saying, hey, the one big beautiful bill adds ICE agents, Customs Patrol officers, Border Patrol agents. This all works to their advantage on lobbying for that legislation now.
Well, I noticed we're not talking about Elon Musk anymore.
Convenient,
he's been kind of off the news for a little bit. And we can kind of get back to some of the issues that are maybe more beneficial to President Trump. Again, he polls very well on immigration issues. He can remind people, hey, my one big beautiful bill fits right into this.
Look at these images on Bloomberg TV and on YouTube. We've got a pretty massive crowd that is beginning to grow here in downtown L.A. Jeannie, we heard earlier this hour from Andrew Cuomo, who asked what happens if this spills into the streets of New York or Chicago. Do you have an answer?
I don't think it's a matter of if. I think it is a matter of when. And I thought it was such a good interview with Andrew Cuomo today talking about these issues. Donald Trump promised on the campaign trail that whether the National Guard was requested by the governors or not, if some protest broke out that he wasn't in line with, he would send them in, and he would also send in the military. He is doing both of those things now in L.A., and they will do it in other sanctuary cities, including Chicago, New York, and others. There's a House Oversight committee hearing on Thursday that's going to be fascinating. It is on sanctuary states, and they have 3 Democratic governors appearing: Hochul from New York, Waltz from Minnesota, and Pritzker from Illinois. So we will hear from 3 more people in addition to Gavin Newsom, who have very strong opinions on this issue as leaders of sanctuary states.
Well, and when we consider the voices of those Democrats, or frankly any elected Democrat, Jeannie, how complicated is the messaging around this for them? How do you simultaneously condemn the violence that has been seen while also condemning the administration, knowing that, as Lester was just pointing out, a majority of Americans are with the president on these policies? Yeah, majority are with him, except when it comes to trying to remove people and disrupt the lives of people who have just been living. There are 12 million plus people in this country, many of whom came, 6-7 million who came as children, who are paying taxes and living. So that is something that people do not abide by and is not something that they thought President Trump was going to do. So that is a danger for the Trump administration with pursuing this policy. And why are they pursuing it? Because Stephen Miller said 2,000 to 3,000 pickups and deportations per day, or we start firing ICE officials. That is why they are going after low-hanging fruit. These are people who are abiding by the law, checking in with federal authorities the way they're supposed to do, and, oh, by the way, paying taxes. So all of this can also hurt our economy. People will not abide by that. So Democrats have to say law-abiding, nonviolent protests, yes, but we don't do what Donald Trump is doing and send in the National Guard and the military without request. And we don't attack children in their schools and busboys in their restaurants that are working and paying taxes.
Looks like this crowd in Los Angeles is shifting a bit as police try to move their lines around. Lester, this could grow, could be another bad night, could be bad nights for the rest of the week. If this continues, and people at home are watching these images, do the political liabilities also shift?
I'm not sure they do. Some of the images from the protests that, some people are calling riots, maybe not wrongly on occasion, are pretty bad. And you're seeing folks throwing things at law enforcement officials. You're seeing attacks on federal buildings. I mean, there is more than a nugget of truth in the idea that some of this needs to be stopped. And I think so. It's going to depend on the details. I think Jeannie is absolutely right. If the White House takes this too far, they are going to have a risk. But if it's to deal with violence on the streets of L.A. or Chicago or New York or something like that, I think the president will be in good stead. But if he goes too far and is, deporting people who are more sympathetic than criminals, then maybe it does shift. I think on response to a riot, no. Yeah.
All right, Lester Munson and Jeannie Shanzano, our political panel this evening, thank you so much. And of course, Joe, there is also the question of how the courts could factor in here, as Governor Newsom has filed suit over the deployment of National Guard troops. And we have seen courts act very quickly on the decision-making of this administration in cases past.
We may well have headlines on this before we meet again. And do check back with us tomorrow. In the meantime, the Washington Edition newsletter on the terminal and online. Thanks for joining us on Balance of Power. With Kaylee Lines, I'm Joe Matthew. This is Bloomberg.